Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Storyline English. I'm really happy you're here with me today. Get comfortable, relax your mind, and let's open the door to another story together. Today's story is about two powerful countries. They did not fight with armies. They did not fight with weapons. They fought with rockets. They fought with science. And they fought to reach something no human had ever touched before: the stars above us. This is the story of the Great Space Race, a journey that changed the world forever. So close your eyes for a moment, breathe slowly, and let's begin. Before we start, if you are new here, welcome to Storyline English. This channel is your place to learn English through calm, beautiful stories. If you enjoy today's journey, please like this video and subscribe. It helps more people find this peaceful place to learn. Now, let's go back in time. The year was 1945. A great and terrible war had just ended. Millions of people had suffered. Cities were destroyed. The world was tired and broken. But from the darkness of that war, two countries rose up stronger than before. One was the United States of America, a land of freedom, technology, and big dreams. The other was the Soviet Union, also called the USSR, a powerful country that believed in a different way of living. These two countries did not trust each other. They watched each other carefully. They were afraid of each other. And slowly, a new kind of competition began, not on the battlefield, but in the sky. Scientists in both countries looked up at the stars and asked the same quiet question: what if we could go there? What if a human being could leave the Earth and travel into space? This was not a simple dream. It was a dangerous, expensive, and almost impossible idea. But both countries believed they could do it, and neither of them was willing to lose. The race had not started yet, but the fire was already burning, and no one in the world knew just how far that fire would reach. After the war ended, both countries did something very important. They searched for the best scientists in the world, especially scientists who understood rockets. In Germany, a young engineer named Wernher von Braun had built powerful rockets for the German army during the war. When the war ended, the Americans brought him to the United States. They gave him a laboratory. They gave him a team. And they asked him to build bigger and better rockets. At the same time, the Soviet Union had their own brilliant engineer. His name was Sergei Korolev. He was a quiet man, a serious man, a man who had survived very difficult times. He had been put in prison by his own government years before, but he never stopped dreaming. When he was freed, the Soviet government asked him to lead their rocket program. Korolev worked in secret. Very few people knew his name, but his ideas were extraordinary. These two men, von Braun in America and Korolev in the USSR, were the quiet engines behind the space race. They never met. They never spoke. But in a way, they were always competing with each other. Every rocket one of them built was an answer to the other, and the world did not yet know that these two men were about to change history forever. Who would win? That question was still far away, but the journey had already begun. October 4th, 1957. It was a calm autumn evening in the Soviet Union. Deep in the desert of Kazakhstan, a rocket stood tall and ready. Inside a small metal ball, about the size of a beach ball, was a simple radio. Engineers checked everything one last time. And then, with a great roar, the rocket launched into the sky. The metal ball separated from the rocket and floated into space. It began to orbit the Earth, slowly, quietly, far above the clouds. This small metal ball was called Sputnik. It was the first human-made object ever to travel in space. Every 96 minutes, it went around the entire Earth. And as it traveled, it sent a small radio signal down to the ground. A soft, steady beep. People around the world could hear it on their radios. Beep, beep, beep. In America, people were shocked. They looked up at the night sky and felt something new, something uncomfortable. Fear. If the Soviets could put an object in space, could they also put a weapon there? The American government acted quickly. They needed to catch up. The race was now real, and the USSR was winning. But this was only the beginning, because a month later, the Soviets did something even more surprising, something that made the whole world stop and stare in disbelief. 1 month after Sputnik, in November 1957, the Soviet Union launched a second spacecraft into space. This one was different. This one carried a passenger. Her name was Laika. She was a small dog, a street dog from the city of Moscow. Scientists had chosen her because she was calm and gentle. They trained her carefully. They gave her a special suit to wear, and on a cold November morning, they placed her inside a small capsule on top of a rocket. And they launched her into space. Laika became the first living creature to orbit the Earth. People around the world were amazed. But the story of Laika is also a sad one. The technology of that time was not advanced enough to bring her home safely. She did not return. She traveled quietly around the Earth, and then she was gone. The Soviets had shown the world that a living being could survive in space, at least for a short time. But now a bigger question was growing in every scientist's mind. Could a human being go to space? Could a person leave the Earth, travel among the stars, and come back alive? This question drove everything that came next. It was the heart of the race. And both countries were working night and day to answer it first. After Sputnik, America was embarrassed. The world's most powerful nation had been beaten to space by their rival. The American government moved quickly. They created a new organization called NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA's job was simple: beat the Soviets. They recruited brave test pilots and trained them as astronauts. They built new rockets. They spent enormous amounts of money. But in the early years, things did not go smoothly. American rockets sometimes exploded on the launch pad. Missions were delayed. The Soviets kept moving forward. In April 1961, the USSR achieved something truly extraordinary. A young Soviet pilot named Yuri Gagarin climbed into a small spacecraft called Vostok 1. He was calm. He smiled. And at 9:07 in the morning, the rocket launched. Yuri Gagarin flew around the entire Earth in just 108 minutes. He looked out of the small window and saw the blue curve of our planet below him. He was the first human being in space. When he landed safely and walked out onto the ground, the Soviet Union celebrated. The world celebrated. And in America, people asked again with great worry, will we ever catch up? But across the ocean, one American leader was already thinking about a much bigger goal. A goal that seemed almost impossible. In May 1961, just weeks after Gagarin's historic flight, the American president, John F. Kennedy, stood before the United States Congress. He spoke clearly and calmly. He said that America would send a man to the moon before the end of the decade, before the year 1970. He said America would do this not because it was easy, but because it was hard. The room was silent for a moment. People looked at each other. The moon? A human being on the moon? NASA was still struggling with basic space flights. The Soviets were far ahead. And Kennedy was promising the moon, literally. But this promise changed everything. Suddenly, NASA had a clear direction. The whole country had a goal. Thousands of scientists, engineers, and workers came together with one shared purpose. They called the program Apollo. The name came from the ancient Greek god of the sun and light, and the work began immediately. It was difficult. It was dangerous. It took years. Some astronauts lost their lives during training accidents. But the American people did not give up. Slowly, carefully, step by step, NASA began to close the distance. And in the Soviet Union, Korolev and his team worked just as hard. Both countries knew the moon mission was near, and both countries wanted to be first. The most important moment in the race was coming, but neither side knew yet how the story would end. The road to the moon was not smooth. On January 27, 1967, a terrible tragedy happened at NASA. 3 American astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were inside their Apollo 1 spacecraft during a ground test. A fire started inside the capsule. It spread very quickly. All 3 astronauts died. America was heartbroken. The Apollo program stopped for nearly 2 years. People asked if the moon mission was too dangerous, if the cost was too high. But slowly, the engineers returned to their work. They made the spacecraft safer. They checked everything again and again. At the same time, in the Soviet Union, another tragedy happened. In April 1967, a Soviet cosmonaut named Vladimir Komarov died when his spacecraft, Soyuz 1, crashed on return to Earth. And quietly, behind the walls of the Soviet space program, something else happened. Sergei Korolev, the brilliant engineer who had led the Soviet space program from the beginning, had died in January 1966 during a medical operation. Without him, the Soviet moon program lost its direction. It became slower, less focused. Decisions were harder to make. And while America rebuilt and moved forward with renewed energy, the Soviets began to fall behind. The race was not over, but the balance had shifted. And far above them both, the moon waited patiently, as it always had. By 1968, NASA was ready to try again. In December of that year, 3 American astronauts, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders, traveled all the way to the moon on Apollo 8. They did not land, but they flew around the moon, They looked down at its gray, quiet surface, and they looked back at the Earth, a small, blue, beautiful planet floating in black space. William Anders took a photograph. He called it Earthrise. It showed the Earth rising above the moon's horizon. It was one of the most beautiful and powerful photographs ever taken. People around the world saw it and felt something deep inside, a feeling of wonder and smallness and connection. And then came the summer of 1969, July. The whole world was watching. NASA was ready. 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, climbed into Apollo 11. The rocket was taller than a 30-story building. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With a sound louder than thunder, the rocket rose from the Earth, and the final chapter of the space race had begun. July 20th, 1969. After 4 days of travel through the darkness of space, the Apollo 11 spacecraft reached the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin entered a small landing vehicle called the Eagle. Michael Collins stayed in the main spacecraft, orbiting alone above. The Eagle descended slowly toward the moon's surface. The ground below was covered in dust and ancient rocks. Instruments beeped. The fuel was running low. And then, gently, the Eagle landed. Neil Armstrong looked out of the small window and said the famous words, "The Eagle has landed." Back on Earth, in Mission Control in Houston, people cried. They shook hands. They breathed deeply for the first time in hours. Hours later, Neil Armstrong opened the hatch. He climbed slowly down the ladder, and with one careful step, his boot touched the surface of the moon. He spoke clearly and calmly. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." More than 600 million people around the world heard these words on their televisions and radios. It was the largest audience in history. Buzz Aldrin joined him. Together, they walked on the moon. They collected rocks. They planted an American flag. They left a small plaque that said, "We came in peace for all mankind." And for a few quiet hours, the whole world felt like one. The race was over. America had won. But something larger than any competition had just happened. Humanity had touched the moon. After Apollo 11, America sent more astronauts to the moon. In total, 12 human beings walked on its surface between 1969 and 1972. The Soviet Union, without Korolev and without a clear direction, never sent a cosmonaut to the moon. They focused instead on building space stations, and in that area, they continued to make important discoveries. Over the years, the competition between the two countries slowly became cooperation. In 1975, American and Soviet spacecraft docked together in orbit, a handshake in space. And today, astronauts from many countries live and work together on the International Space Station. The space race taught the world many things. It showed us that human beings are capable of extraordinary things when they have a strong enough dream. It showed us that science and curiosity can take us further than weapons ever could. And it showed us something quiet and beautiful. That when you look down at the Earth from space, you do not see countries or borders. You see one small, blue world, fragile and precious, and worth protecting. As an English learner, this story is a gift to you. Because just like the astronauts who trained for years before reaching the moon, you are on your own journey. You are learning, growing, and moving forward. Every word you understand today is a small step. Every story you listen to is a small rocket launch. And one day, you will look back and see how far you have traveled. Thank you for listening to Storyline English today. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. I would love to know what you felt. And if you want a part 2, where we go even deeper into this incredible journey, just write, "I want part 2." If enough of you ask, we will continue this adventure together. Until then, keep listening, keep learning, and keep moving forward. Slowly and surely, you are getting there.